Hello, and thank you for joining us in the Continuing the Conversation studio. Continuing the Conversation, or CTC, is an arts and education network founded and organized by alumni from the Arts and Education program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Our goal is to provide spaces for conversations that are important to advancing work in the arts and education sector, and to get as many people as we can across sectors engaged in those conversations. You can join in today by commenting on our website, aieconversation.org, or by tweeting with the hashtag AIECTCchat. I'm Aliza Greenberg, a co-chair of CTC, a 2007 alum of the AIE program, and a program manager at the Metropolitan Opera Guild. I'm excited to participate in discussing the role the arts play in creating more inclusive learning environments. I am joined in the studio today by Nicole Agois, a 2006 alumna of the AIE program and the Cool Schools director at VSA Massachusetts. And Cool Schools stands for Creative Outlook on Learning. And I'm also joined by Lauren Jobson-Ahmed, a 2013 alumna and a CTC committee member, and also the program coordinator for the Everyday Arts and Special Education program at Urban Arts Partnership in New York City. We are also joined by two current students from the Arts and Education program, Hannah Hansons-Reed, who is an intern at VSA Massachusetts, and Tasha Chemel, who is developing workshops to shift paradigms for people with disabilities in arts and education. And as always, we are joined by Steve Seidel, the director of the Arts and Education program at Harvard. Steve, I'll hand it off to you to get the conversation started.
Thank you, Aliza. It's good to see you again, and it's good to be doing another Continuing the Conversation studio chat and to have such a great group here today. So as Aliza said, we want to talk today about the role of the arts in creating more inclusive learning environments. At least within the arts education community, it's not uncommon for many people to think that the arts have perhaps some special roles to play in the creation of inclusive learning environments. And we're going to explore that. We're going to ask that question as we go a little bit further into this conversation. What are the particular qualities of the arts, works of art, and artistic processes and artistic experiences that seem to us to be, what are those particular qualities that seem to us to be most powerful and most useful? But I think that we need to take two steps back. I'm going to and examine our language just a little bit. I'm not going to open this one up for conversation exactly. I'm going to just say that for the sake of this conversation, when we talk about the arts, we are talking very broadly. We're talking about all kinds of human cultural production, artistic activity, many art forms. When we say the arts, it's not just code for the visual arts. We're not just talking about the performing arts. We're talking about new media. We're talking about, I mean, really, it's we could be talking about culinary arts, and I mean, just all over the sort of. Let's take for this conversation a very broad embrace of what counts as artistic work and artistic learning. But I do want to, if that's okay with everyone, I do want to open up and find out what it means to talk about inclusive learning environments in each of your contexts. So inclusion on the surface is a word that I think most of us resonate to, probably because we don't feel comfortable talking about exclusive learning environments or environments that exclude whole sets of learners or even a single learner. But we all are educators. We've all got real experience, and we know that that what that actually can mean and how you make that real is very complex. So I would like to just start by asking, what does inclusion or what does an inclusive learning environment mean in your context or to you? And if it's okay, I would turn to Nicole first.
Sure. Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. So thank you for inviting me to be here. So the context that in which I work, which is at BSA through the Cool Schools program, is mostly in the classroom. We have teaching artists who partner with classroom teachers to create arts-integrated learning experiences for kids with a very, very, very wide range of abilities, ages 3 through 21. So we work in a very in a very inclusive community in every sense of a word. And inclusion, I think it's important to talk about inclusion by kind of stating what it's not. And I think there's often, I've seen often the assumption that inclusion means putting kids with and without disabilities in the same group. And that certainly isn't what inclusion is. I think in order for for an inclusive learning environment to happen, or for true inclusion to happen, that learning environment needs to be designed and created with the needs of a very broad range of learners in mind. So it's in terms of physical access, in terms of programmatic access, materials, resources, teaching strategies, all of those things need to be planned from the beginning to embrace the enormous learner variability that our kids come in with in the classroom. So it's not just about putting the kids together in the same place. It's about a very deliberate design and a very deliberate set of resources. And I think it's also really important to think about kind of this kind of, maybe I think, artificial need that we feel often as educators to separate kids into two groups. The group of kids with disabilities and the kids without disabilities, as if that were it. And these kids learn this way and these kids learn this other way. And kind of saying that disability happens within these walls. So if you're inside those walls, you have a disability, and if you're not, then you don't. I think those walls are very artificial, and those lines are very blurry. And if we think about our experience as humans as kind of fluctuating in and out of those walls, I think we get a much more accurate picture of how people learn, and the fact that everybody struggles with something, everybody's really good at something, everybody's interested in different things. So thinking about how incredibly different we all are in the way that we learn, I think is really helpful when we think about inclusion, because it's not just preparing the environment for the kids with disabilities. It's preparing an environment so that everybody can come in and participate and thrive.
Great, great. Thank you. So, you put out a lot for us to think about, but let's just keep going, and Lauren will build. We'll go from Lauren to Aliza, and then come back here to Cambridge and hear from Tasha and Hannah. So, Lauren.
Yes, I echo all of those sentiments. And I think for educators, I think we all know these things in our hearts, and I think sometimes where we struggle with is, what are our strategies then? What are our next steps for actually making those learning opportunities possible? And one pedagogy that we like to use and really think about is, what are the essences of good teaching in general? We have a little acronym called KNOW, K-N-O-W, and that stands for know what's important and let the rest go. So really understanding for a diverse body of learners, what is the one essential thing that everyone needs to take away with today? Is it learning to pass an object to your peer? Is it learning to ask for help or directions? Is it no hand-over-hand assistance with something that requires fine motor skills? Then secondly, noticing and using everything as a learning opportunity. So it's not just about the task at hand, it's about what actually ended up happening and how does that re-inform the educator about their students' learning style, and also interactions with their peers. Also doing one thing at a time, so really simple, clear, one step at a time directions that have multiple cues to follow along. I myself am a very visual person. I'm not very good with auditory information. So really just thinking about how am I transmitting information and am I delivering it in every possible format? And then lastly, waiting and see what happens. So I think sometimes when we're teaching, we want to just get it. We want it to happen in the moment, and some students take longer times than others. You know, that's just who we are as people. So, you know, we have to muse upon things, we have to process it. We have different ways of processing information. So those practices come to mind when I think about defining and understanding inclusion.
Thank you. Lauren, actually, I wonder if you could hang in for a minute and just give us a little bit a clearer sense of the context that you work in.
Sure. So the program that I work with, Everyday Arts for Special Education, its current iteration is we work with elementary and a couple of middle school students in New York City's District 75, which is a non-geographic region in New York City that is actually all self-contained classrooms of students with varying special needs. So we have students who have multiple disabilities, to students who are medically fragile, to students who are on the autism spectrum, to more you know, access to psychosocial diagnoses. And oftentimes they're all put in the same classroom in different ratios based upon their individualized education plan. So even though our classrooms are self-contained, the students are nowhere near alike. So differentiation is really key in thinking about teaching and you know, designing artistic practice in that regard.
Steve, I think you're on mute, so I might jump in.
Thank you. I apologize. I thought I hit the button. Lauren, thank you. And what I think already part of what we're seeing is that when you get a group of 5 educators together who work in, quote unquote, in that's helpful. Aliza, do you want to try to share a little bit about your own situation?
Sure. So I work at the Metropolitan. Oh, sorry, you were breaking up a little bit. So I work at the Metropolitan Opera Guild, which is we do school programs all across grade levels and types of school. And most of my programs are in general education settings, but we work with the whole grade level or the whole school population. So that includes self-contained and inclusion classrooms. And I also am working with Lincoln Center Education and Trusty Sidekick Theater to develop a show for students and for children on the autism spectrum and their caregivers. So I'm sort of working on inclusion in 2 different settings and 2 very different settings. And I think what Nicole said really resonated with me about it's not just about putting kids with and without disabilities in the same group. It's creating atmospheres and environments that are created with their needs in mind and with the needs of a broad group of learners in mind. And I think personally, I'm interested in creating environments where everyone can participate and sort of aiming for coexistence, but meaningful coexistence. And whether that means in the same school are on the same planet or in the same room. I think those things vary and differ. I also, in my work in the classroom, when we talk about inclusion with our teaching artists and with our teachers, we talk about creating multiple goals for a lesson so that success can mean different things for different students. And I think that resonates for me into speaking to inclusion broadly. It's an environment where success can mean different things for different people. So that's sort of what inclusion means for me.
Great. So now let's turn to Tasha and invite Tasha, I'd want to invite you to share your take on this big question.
Yeah, so right now I think I'm really beginning my career in arts education. I am totally blind but identify as culturally sighted and as an artist. And what that experience, what choosing to take on that label has done for me has really brought me into contact with maybe the cutting edge or the boundaries of inclusion, and have really caused me to rethink how I even feel about that word, which I think is an important, taking a step back, because I think everyone has made really great contributions to in terms of what they feel about that word, and I especially like what Nicole had to say about kind of breaking down that boundary between who has a disability and who doesn't. But I wonder what would happen if we didn't use the word inclusion, if there was another word that we could use, and I don't know what that word would be exactly. And the reason I think that I have such a hard time with the word inclusion is because I don't think it goes far enough, and that's what I think I heard people say, like people saying. I think that sometimes it can bring about this superficial, like, you know, let's put everyone together in the classroom. Because for me, as a blind artist, I don't want to just be included, because to me that feels like I'm sitting on the edge of a circle and somebody like maybe was kind enough to let me in the room. Like it almost feels like I'm being done a favor. Whereas if there was another word that had more of a warmth to it, more of a human connection, I would feel more welcomed in that group and more in the center of it, instead of being relegated to the edge, which is often how I felt when I've made this decision, you know, kind of a brave decision in my perspective to enter very visually oriented in art spaces. I feel like I'm kind of at the edge, and that there's some people maybe questioning whether I belong in that space or not.
Thank you, Tasha. And I have to say that I love conversation that really opens up our questions, the very language that we're using, because I feel like when we're doing that, we're getting underneath a lot of the assumptions that have carried with the language that has sort of accrued to a particular concept or idea. So I totally appreciate your bringing that perspective in, Tasha. And I'm going to turn to Hannah and just ask Hannah to share, Hannah, a little bit about sort of how you describe your context or multiple contexts in which you've been doing the thinking that you've been doing and what's coming up.
Yeah. So just to kind of echo off some of this, so I work with Nicole at VSA. So some of my ideas of inclusion come from that work that we do. But for me, a lot of the stuff that I've been working on recently, and Tasha, another student from the program, and I have been working on a workshop that we just recently brought to Montserrat College of Art, and we're really talking about these ideas of inclusion and how the arts can facilitate different conversations, different kind of learning experiences. And I think for me, what has really come out of this on a personal level is this need to really check my assumptions and to really get, and maybe Tasha can talk a little bit about this later, but about the idea of really getting to know each learner on an individual level and understanding what they need personally, and that can mean a variety of things, and never to make the assumptions that that an inclusive learning space means that everyone's together and learning, but more focusing on each person and how they learn and what they want to learn and what that might look like for them. So I think that's kind of a conversation that we've been diving into, that there's not necessarily a lot of answers of how that might look always, but it's really been in my thought lately.
Great. You know, it's making me think, so sometimes when people are talking about inclusive learning, they'll say, well, it's really good teaching that you are talking about. You know, this is not just something you do in a particular circumstance, it's what you would do in any situation, any time. And Tasha's comment and Hannah's comment is making me think about good community. Community suggests a kind of connection that everyone who's there is part of, and in a meaningful way. So I'm aware of where we are in the time of this session, and I'm wondering if it makes sense to push a little bit further toward some of the ideas that Hannah and Tasha have been working with recently, and Nicole has been part of that conversation as well, talking about rethinking some of our practices and some of our assumptions about what includes. And Tasha, I wonder if you might want to talk a little bit about the idea of access intimacy. I turn to you because you're the person who has introduced this idea to me and now to many others around here. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this idea of access intimacy is a pretty new concept in the world of disability studies, and it was put forward by a disability justice activist called Mia Mingus. And basically what access intimacy refers to is a feeling that that you feel completely comfortable and safe asking for what it is you need. And you don't have this fear or this pressure of feeling like you're a burden or you're going to upset people or you're asking for too much. And when people experience access intimacy, it's not like everything happens 100% all of the time correctly and accessibly. Mia Mingus says in her article that sometimes access intimacy is two people staring at like an inaccessible world and confronting that. But the point is that they're doing it together, that there's a human connection and a soul connection going on. And this goes beyond this idea of compliance and having a checklist and, you know, do we have this in Braille, and do we have this in large print, and do we have audio description, check, check, check. It goes beyond that. And I think something that I'm really grappling with is what that looks like on a practical level in terms of a lot of you work in programs, and there's this idea of if everyone needs something different and everyone's access needs are different and you have a desire to empower people with disabilities to make choices about what access looks like for them, how that looks on a programmatic level when there are limited resources or programmatic policies. And I don't have an answer for that, but I think basically transparency makes the most sense. So if I am blind and, you know, I approach your organization and I have a particular access need, and you tell me, well, you know, if you want to come to our exhibit, we have audio descriptions. That's what we do for blind people. Like, here's a pair of headphones, listen to this, walk around the exhibit. Like, that's what we have to offer. You know, it would be great if I could say, you know, if I felt comfortable enough to ask you, well, could I have a guide? That would be better suited to my needs. Could I have someone to walk around with me and offer me descriptions of the pieces that are tailored to what it is I need? And if you, as the organization, can't provide that, the most transparent you can be about that, the better. So instead of saying, no, that's not our policy, that's not a reasonable request, which, you know, would kind of leave me feeling like bad for asking that questions, you know, you could reply with something like, well, that's not something we offer now, but thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. That could be something that we could offer in the future. So that's my take on that, but I'd be really curious to hear other, like, if people have questions about access intimacy or how other people think it could play out in their settings and contexts.
So let me just say, we're nearing the end of our time, but I'd like to make sure that everybody gets just one more quick round. And Nicole, I wonder if you want to pick up and share any thoughts in response to what's been said since you last spoke, but also maybe a final comment.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking a lot about. I was discussing this with you, Steve, the other day about kind of comparing inclusion to kind of a LEED certificate that you would give to a building in terms of how environmentally friendly it is. And I think that, you know, you could never be too environmentally friendly or as environmentally friendly as you can be. In the same way, you cannot be too inclusive or completely inclusive. It's a process that is ongoing, and it's a process where you always have to be in tune with the fact that you're dealing with a human who, despite the fact that they may have this specific disability, they're a human who has a life experience that is different from another human who has the same disability. And to me, access intimacy, the idea of access intimacy really brings that home, because it makes, and you were talking, Steve, earlier about good teaching. You know, there's a lot of things that we think about when we talk about good inclusive teaching that are similar to things that are happening in good teaching. You know, if you good teachers are more likely to be able to work well in an inclusive setting because they're, you know, they have really great resources and they know how to work with children and understand their needs and all of that. And I think in my work in inclusion over the years, what I've learned, probably like rule number one, is ask the question, get to know the person you're working with. Don't make assumptions, and really try to connect with the human and say, how are we going to make this work for you? How are we going to figure this out together? And I think that's where the arts come in as a huge resource. And, you know, it's this idea that you can put out a challenge or a prompt and allow all of these different kinds of responses in through the arts, that you're allowing people to show a wide range of their abilities that may not be seen in other ways. And also, you were talking, Steve, earlier in the conversation about how when we talk about art, we're not talking about painting and singing and drawing, but we're talking about all of these processes and all of these dispositions. And as educators, if we kind of mirror some of those dispositions and some of those processes, and we think about how we have to bring a lot of creativity into inclusive teaching to really try to figure out what works and what are the different resources, what am I going to use, how am I going to design this, I think the arts can give us a lot of rich tools and processes to make inclusion work as well as we can.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Lauren, I turn to you for a final thought.
Yes, I completely agree with Nicole's sentiments. You know, I think there's so much to absorb. Well, you know, I think I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty articulating my thoughts right now. yeah, I mean, I think also in creating, thinking about shared learning experiences and environments, I think just ownership of that space and an alternative, just trying to get students to understand that they can undo and reimagine their learning, and trying to really facilitate that, I think, through rediscovering our own ideas of what good teaching is. I fear I'm not being very articulate enough because I'm really hanging on to what was just said, and I really enjoyed it. But I do think reflective practice is very necessary for educators in thinking about this work, and sort of undoing our own assumptions about student learning.
Thank you, Lauren. I know that we're at near the end of our time. I want to turn to Hannah, and then from Hannah we'll hand it back to Aliza, who can bring us to the end of the session. But Hannah, a final thought for you?
I will just very quickly say, I think that one of my biggest takeaways from having these conversations is, like Nicole was saying, this isn't a process that will ever be perfected, but I think really it comes down to always being open to the idea of having a conversation and reimagining your own personal practice as an artist, as an educator, and evolving. If there's someone that you encounter that makes you question how you've been teaching or creating art, to really be willing to challenge yourself to continue to develop in terms of creating a more intimate, comfortable, accessible kind of teaching and practice.
Well, that was very elegant. Thank you. And Aliza, hand it back to you.
Thanks. I really love where this conversation has gone, and working specifically with populations on the autism spectrum. I think autism is such a varied and unpredictable disability, and I think it they say you meet one person with autism, you meet one person with autism. Everyone is different, and so this idea of access intimacy, I think, really brings out what I hope for and strive for when interacting with people with autism, is that it is an intimate interaction, and it goes where it goes, and it develops based on the person that you're interacting with, and so it kind of all leads towards us living as humans together. So I think it's a beautiful way to sort of end the conversation, but hopefully we'll all continue the conversation on the website, because I think I feel like we just got started. So we can continue the conversation. This video chat will be archived on the website, and we can continue the conversation there. We hope that everyone watching will comment and share their thoughts. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. This was actually our final studio of the season, but all the videos from the past studio chats are archived on the website, along with some written blog posts from alumni around the world. So we hope you will join us in continuing to discuss there, and we'll be back in the studio soon. And thank you all so much.